People are dying due to hospital wait times. We've got a 39-year-old guy who went to the hospital and they said nothing's wrong with you, and they sent him back out to the waiting room and he left, and then he passed away. And not great. Not great. Our healthcare is providing more healthcare for foreigners, it seems, than it is for Canadians, and that's a big problem. Trudeau spent $918,000, that's almost $1 million, on a 3-day trip to Italy and Switzerland. 3 or 4 day trip. So that's a lot of money. That's a huge amount of money to spend on food, and like on a trip more generally, huge amount of money. So people are upset about that. The Liberal GST holiday gets royal assent, and some more details about that, like businesses don't have to do it if they don't want to. So that's really interesting. Romanian censorship, apparently they're arresting people in the streets now if they're talking about how the whole election being canceled and annulled is a problem. And, you know, the Romanian people in charge don't like that, so they just arrest those people. We've got some drone information from New Jersey. We've got Canada Post strike update, GST holiday issues. I've already mentioned that. And election issues, more generally. Scott Moe, tariffs. We'll talk about tariffs as well. Scott Moe is weighing in and saying Justin Trudeau should call an election because Canadians should get to decide who gets to negotiate with Team Trump. And it seems like we don't want Trudeau. So this is a bit longer. We've already seen this, a bit of it from Scott Moe, but this is a bit longer than the clip I had yesterday. So there's lots to get to. Let's get to it. First, we have to talk about the impending election. We're going to start there and then talk about tariffs, and we're going to talk about the GST thing and lots more. So let's get to it. First, Scott Moe talking about the tariffs and everything that's been happening. Says, yeah, we should do something. We should make a move to fix this. Brian Lilly says, every province will react to tariffs and export restrictions differently. Saskatchewan can't afford to cut oil, potash, or uranium. It would kill their economy. Ford cutting off electricity won't kill Ontario. Most premiers agree with Moe. Call an election. Cutting off the electricity, starting a trade war with the United States, and starting it by cutting off the electricity to the United States may not directly kill Ontario. But do you think that Trump wouldn't punch back? Like, I really think that Trump would punch back. So here's Scott Moe talking about this. Here we go.
And so my suggestion was to actually bring the CBSA under an arm of the military, count it as your 2% military spend, and then allow your military to help with some of the short-term staffing challenges that we have in that space.
There was some aggressive pushback against any Trump tariffs, including export bans. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has been talking about restricting electricity sales to the U.S. Is Saskatchewan considering any restrictions along that line as well, whether that be oil, potash, et cetera?
No, what we'd be looking for is how do we actually advance this conversation to get away from the talk around tariffs and get back to doing what we do in North America, which is we are very much part of the energy and the food security supply chain. However, in saying that, we've just heard today that the federal government may be looking at export tariffs on oil, potash, and uranium, export tariffs on our own products, so taxing Canadians on products that we are exporting, which is exactly ridiculous as it sounds. And most certainly we would say that any talk of that is not on in this province. It's a betrayal of those that work in the industry. It's a betrayal, I would say, more broadly of Canadians. So we would encourage, if that's where the federal government is looking for retaliatory action, that they very quickly reconsider. And we would say, in addition to that, that maybe it's time for Canadians to have a say and a choice, and to determine who they would like to have a mandate, a 4-year mandate to negotiate with the incoming Trump administration. We see President-elect Trump with one of the strongest mandates that we've seen in recent history to negotiate on behalf of Americans over the course of the next 4 years. Alongside that, we see a Republican majority in the Senate and in the House. We're over our 4 years of what would be considered the norm for our minority administration here in Canada, and maybe what we need is someone to have the same mandate in Canada to negotiate with that incoming Trump administration. And so we would ask Prime Minister Trudeau to do the right thing, to give Canadians the opportunity to make the choice on who is going to represent them at the table.
I think it's a fair point, and it took a little while to get there, but there was some kind of laying the table, laying the groundwork to set it up and to really drive the point home. I think Scott Moe did a good job. And yeah, great point. I think that it's time for an election. And Maxime Bernier is putting pressure on the CEO of Rumble, Chris Pawlowski. I'm getting his name wrong. Pawlowski. I'm sorry. It's not intentional, I promise you. Anyway, he says, I'll post a new poll shortly. I deleted the old poll because I wanted to make a new one with all parties and add some thoughts into one post. Now, that was posted December 11th, and Maxime Bernier is getting impatient. He thinks maybe something else is going on here. Maybe Chris isn't going to post anything at all. Just hope everybody forgets about it, right? And Bernier says, hi, Chris. That was 2 days ago, and I haven't seen your new poll with your additional thoughts. So after Bernier posts this, Chris does indeed follow through and posts his, almost at exactly the same time. Isn't that interesting? Oh, actually, it was posted just before Bernier sent this. So, I mean, it's fair that Bernier didn't see it, but Chris did. Oh, wait, no, here. Where is the post? Chris did post it at 11:09 p.m. So it was not at the same time. Bernier had a second post. He says, what's going on? The CEO of Rumble, Chris Pawlowski, posted this poll this afternoon asking who was the right person to lead Canada, Poilievre or me. He later tweeted a comment about how the Conservatives failed in the UK and asked if the rise of the Reform, the UK equivalent of the PPC, could happen in Canada. Then a few hours later, he deleted both posts. Chris is a champion of free speech and follows me on X. The PPC has been using Rumble as an alternative to YouTube, which censors us and censored us during COVID. They still censor everything PPC. Did Chris perhaps get a call from some influential person telling him to stop giving me any airtime? I've been systemically smeared and censored since founding the PPC. There are lots of people in high places who clearly don't want a principled right-wing populist movement to succeed in Canada. Can you tell us what happened? And then, after all of those went out, Chris reposts his poll. He says, who do we think should lead Canada into the future after seeing the landslide in the United States and what's happening with the Reform Party in the United Kingdom? Who is the right choice for Canada's future? Like other countries, I believe we need a significant change. Who will bring the heat? Poilievre is winning with 59%. Bernier is second with 36%. Justin Trudeau is third with 2.2%. And Jagmeet Singh has 2%. So that's interesting. It's similar to the last poll, although the last poll was much closer for Bernier. There were 7,000 votes, and I think Bernier was in the 40s, and Poilievre was closer with like 52. I think it was 52-46 or something to that effect. 43-55 maybe. My memory is a little fuzzy on it, but and I saw multiple polls, so I'm not sure which one is standing out in my head, but it was closer, and there's 9,000 votes here. Now, again, he's the CEO of Rumble, so there's going to be a lot of Americans voting on this. There's going to be a lot of non-Canadians voting on this. And really, polls are more of a reflection of the audience than, like, of Chris's audience, rather than a reflection of Canada as such, right? So just be careful with this kind of stuff because it's not really reflecting a real poll. Like, it's not weighted. There's more people than the pollsters in Canada use by a lot, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're people who matter to our election process. Does that make sense? So take it with a grain of salt, as you would everything, right? Here is something else to go along with our election stuff. Poilievre is being dragged through the coals by the Liberals, who keep pivoting to he doesn't have his security clearance. He's not been properly briefed on the security clearance stuff, and without being properly briefed, you know, he's putting national security at risk, and they're making that kind of implication, right? And, you know, he's the leader of a political party. He should be briefed on this. If he gets briefed on this, as these news clips will clearly demonstrate, he will not be able to talk about it under threat of being, like, charged. So there's a reason he's not getting this clearance, because if he got this clearance, he wouldn't be able to talk about it at all. Weird, right? So we won't listen to this whole thing, but here's just a bit of it.
You have to understand, and Canadians have to understand, that the members of the committee are bound by the Security of Information Act. The members of the committee waived their parliamentary privilege for the privilege to sit on this committee. That means if they inadvertently reveal information, they can be prosecuted. The members of the committee are bound to this Security of Information Act for the rest of their lives.
Please reveal the information. You could go to jail.
I could be prosecuted. Madam Speaker, members all hold a top secret security clearance, have sworn an oath, and are permanently bound to secrecy under the Security of Information Act, and are permanently bound to secrecy.
Okay, you get the point. There's 2 minutes of that, so I don't think we need to go through all of that, but you get the point, right? Here is Alexandra Lavoie, and she's got Poilievre out on the campaign trail, and make no mistake, that's what this is. And so we're in an unofficial election at this point in time, so watch for the Liberals to use as many non-campaign stops to give away money and spending and announce spending initiatives as possible over the next 6 to 8 months, right? Like that's what they're going to do with their remaining time in office. If they can't get the House of Commons back on track to pass the censorship laws, they're going to spend taxpayer money and put it into constituencies and to places where they want to shore up their support, right? So, we're going to put an LRT in here. Everybody vote Liberal, or the LRT is not going to happen. That kind of stuff, right? And that's campaigning on the taxpayer dime. Anyway, Poilievre is out campaigning, and Alexandra Lavoie says Poilievre addresses the crowd. We're going to cut back on foreign aid that goes to dictators. This turn of phrase just strikes me as really funny. Does this not stick out to anybody else? If we know that the person is a dictator, should we be giving them any money? No, we're just going to cut back. Like, instead of giving them $100,000, we're going to give them $99,000. Cutting back, right? Like, we're super cutting back. We're not going to stop funding them because that would be crazy, but we're going to cut back on funding the dictators. It sticks out to me like a sore thumb. It's a huge red flag. Cut back? What are you doing, man? So here's Poilievre saying, we're going to cut back on that dictator funding. You know, they don't get as much money because we want to keep some money here for the dictators we're importing. Here we go.
We're going to cut back on the foreign aid that goes to dictators like the communist regime in Beijing, which got $250 million of our tax dollars from Trudeau. That's gone.
Cut back on the funding to Beijing, not China, Beijing. We're going to cut back on that because we can't stop it. That's crazy talk, but we can cut back on it.
We will cut back on the terror financing UNRWA to stop funding anti-Semitism.
Would it be hard to say we will completely stop funding UNRWA? Like, would that be hard? We will cut back on that funding. Weak, right? It's weak, mealy-mouthed language. Here's a former Quebec MP, and she's endorsing Poilievre, and so people like what they're hearing, and I just hear red flags. Lavoie again says former Liberal MP Eva Nassif endorses Pierre Poilievre during a lively Quebec rally. We don't want to let Trudeau ruin the country more, she said. It's in French, so should I read it? It's okay. We're gonna keep going because we've done 2 long shows, so I'm not gonna read the French. She endorses him. She's a former Liberal. He is humble about it, whatever. It's all in French. Check it out if you're interested. It's mostly in French. I think it's in French. Natasha says, I attended a CPC rally today, this Friday the 13th. Pierre Poilievre gave a strong speech and the crowd was energetic. Here is an excerpt regarding immigration. I have some thoughts on what he said and what I discussed with him afterwards. And so it's 2 minutes on immigration. We'll listen to about a minute of it unless it makes sense to listen to more. Here we go.
They tried to divide and conquer Canadians, and they're now dividing and conquering themselves. The great thing about Canada was that we left those divisions at our borders. We welcomed people in. We said, you're Canadian now. You're Canadian first. Quand ma femme est venue à Montréal, elle a accepté qu'elle allait être canadienne en premier. Elle n'allait pas inviter des problèmes.
Okay, so he's in and out with French and English. You get the idea, right? We're leaving our racial everything at the door, and now you're Canadian. Ferryman would have something to say about that, right? Natasha Montreal continues. She says, I spoke with Pierre about the need for mass deportations, the need to restore Canadian culture, my concerns about safety for women, given that we are mass importing people from cultures which are incompatible with Canadian culture, and emphasized that the CCP needs to say this, because if they don't say it, then they're not doing anything about it. And then, there's another one. Hold on. I could not. Okay, so this is the next tweet in the thread, but you cannot find this part of the tweet, this part of the thread in the tweet thread. So it is connected. I'm going to retweet it right now. But she says, his eyes became distant. He began to lob one-liners at me. Were things better before Trudeau? I replied, of course, but this problem began before Trudeau. I said I wasn't his enemy, but without re-immigration, Conservatives won't win another election. It's basic mathematics. So it's interesting. It's interesting that these tweets aren't available. Like if you click, this is the thread, and if you click, watch it show up now. If you click the book read, oh, now it shows up. And the other one, it didn't show up. So anyway, there's further. She says, at this point, he averted his eyes, said little, and tried to handshake me along. I explained that I wasn't trying to troll him, that I'm genuinely worried. I explained I received threats from Islamists, that I have traveled and lived elsewhere and wish for Canada to be Canada. I couldn't tell if he agreed with me or not, but I definitely made him uncomfortable. My question to real Conservatives is, do you agree with me? When someone says that they are Canada first, does this mean permitting millions of foreigners who shouldn't be here to stay and work in Canada? I appreciate that he spoke with me, but the chat was a brick wall. People are not merely interchangeable economic units. That's the crux of it right there. The most important aspect of immigration is not whether we have the fiscal capacity to receive foreigners, it's the impact on culture. Our country is at stake. Yeah, the globalists view population as interchangeable economic tokens. And so if you have a population of 40 million, that's 40 million interchangeable economic units. And if you want a really rich country, well, you want like 100 million interchangeable economic units. So you've got to like jack that right up, right? You've got to get your economy really moving, because you don't want babies. You don't want to grow babies, because babies are costly. They're expensive. Why are they expensive, you ask? Because they don't pay taxes until they're 18 years old. Women pay taxes to the man to go to work, and then the government takes taxes and gives it to childcare to raise your children, so you go to work and pay them taxes, right? Children, they haven't figured out a way to do that. Do you remember Oliver Twist? We stopped child labor, and that's supposed to be progressive. It is kind of progressive, but you should apprentice with your dad. You know what I mean? It wouldn't be bad if your dad was a blacksmith or a butcher or something like that, and you're 8 years old learning the tricks of the trade, right? Like that's an area that is maybe, like if you're a slave, that's not great. But if your dad's like, hey, come on over here and chop this fat off, and you know, don't chop off your fingers, son. This is how you avoid doing that. That's a different thing altogether, right? And so like, I think that we are in a situation where the government has financial incentives to make us believe that a Canadian is an interchangeable economic unit, right? And I mean, if you don't see it, everybody is an interchangeable economic unit, then you are a racist, sir, right? Like you need to go, because the reality of our situation is not that we need to grow the economy, but we have a Ponzi scheme as an economy. And if we don't get new suckers into the Ponzi scheme, the whole damn thing collapses. And what happens to people's power when the whole damn thing collapses? Oh, that's right. They don't have it anymore, right? And so it's all a game. We're being screwed because we're watching a shell game instead of actually fixing the problems. And it sucks. And Twitter's almost useless. Twitter's just terrible. It uses, hold on, I'm gonna go back and show you how this thing is censored. Like I want to be transparent and clear about it, because it took me a good I paused the show so I could go and find this. When I clicked onto the original version of this post, here it is, and click the read, it didn't come up. It didn't come up. Anyway, I don't know why it's coming up now, but it wasn't before. And it's frustrating because it feels like when people do make good points, Twitter hides it, unless you've seen it before and then you go and look for it. Anyway, moving on. Tariffs. Let's talk about the tariffs. Sorry, that took too long. Gov.exe is reporting many assume the federal government doesn't want Trump to impose tariffs on Canada. But what if the Liberals secretly do? Why? We all know that they've been destroying the economy for years, so why wouldn't they want to help? Why wouldn't they want help attacking it? Then they can blame Trump for everything broken in Canada. It's Trump's fault, and Stephen Harper's fault, and Pierre Poilievre's fault too, right? It's not our fault. Everything we've done is perfect, except these people keep wrecking what we keep doing. Nope, not true. Here's Danielle Smith. She says, Alberta's energy exports are vital to Canada's economy and our security relationship with the United States. They're threatening this trust risks jobs, national unity, and our nation's security. Prime Minister Trudeau must focus on expanding energy cooperation and securing our southern border. This is the path to avoiding trade wars and tariffs. So Danielle Smith is weighing in on this. Scott Moe is weighing in on this kind of stuff too. Doug Ford is maybe realizing he stuck his foot in his mouth and he's trying to walk it back. But I showed you the video footage of him saying this yesterday, basically, and I was confused where China came into this, other than probably supplying Chinese people in Canada with the material to make the fentanyl. China has very little to do with the problems that Donald Trump was highlighting. The problems Trump was highlighting for the tariffs was an invasion and drugs. So people and drugs flooding into his country. China's not doing that, Doug. It's Canada that's doing that. It's us that are allowing that to happen. And it's us that are allowing that to fester. It's us that have this giant leaky border and criminals everywhere and nobody doing anything to fix it. It's us. It's not the United States. The United States is being gracious and giving us a heads up like, hey, idiot, get your shit together or we're going to drop a very, very uncomfortable bomb on you. Economically. Doug Ford says, President Trump was asked about my comments last night when I said we need to be ready to stand up for Canadian workers if he follows through with his tariffs. President Trump told a reporter that he hopes the United States and Canada can work something out. I agree. The good news is the pathway to a deal isn't complicated. The federal government needs to make sure Canada invests in our shared security with a credible plan to reach our 2% defense spending, NATO commitments, which all premiers support. The federal government needs to immediately protect our border against illegal immigration, drugs, and guns that hurt both Americans and Canadian families. Ontario stands ready to support the Canadian Border Service Agency and RCMP with hundreds of new police officers on the ground alongside planes, helicopters, boots, and drones. Together, we need to stay focused on the real threat, China shipping cheap products through Mexico, undercutting American and Canadian workers. We'll continue to meet with the United States lawmakers on the need to build Fortress Can-Am with our critical minerals in the ring of fire and nuclear energy as we build the first small modular reactors in the G7. We're stronger together. The SMRs were tried and failed in Australia 2015 to 2018. Look it up. They can't get the kilowatt hour cost down to below $50 an hour or something like that. It's completely, you can't do it. It's not viable, and just doing it again and again is not changing the math on it. So it's very interesting, and I think that Doug Ford's argument that China shipping cheap products down through Mexico is harming Canada. I think the majority of the manufacturing in Canada is Chinese, isn't it? And so because of that, like, hey, pot, it's the kettle, you're black, right? Like, it's the pot calling the kettle black. Both things are black. That's why it's funny. But we're both doing it. Everybody's doing it, right? Like, Canada's stamping aluminum, Chinese aluminum with made in Canada stamps and then telling the United States, oh yeah, it was made in Hamilton. Bullshit, right? Like, and Trump had a problem with that in 2016. Like, this is not new. So Doug Ford's argument falls flat to me, but maybe I'm just not aware of everything that's going on. Dan McTeague is responding to Graham. Graham says, can the Americans turn off Enbridge Line 5? We would be so screwed. Yeah, we sure would be. So this whole argument really should calm down, because people should understand just how vulnerable we are. Dan McTeague says, so far, no, they can't turn off Enbridge Line 5, as the 1977 treaty is paramount. But in a different setting, such as a trade war, there's every chance that oil, gas, propane, which transits the United States, could be interrupted. Whoops, right? Like, it's like they purposely are playing a different game than the diplomacy game that Trump is playing. Have you ever played diplomacy? We used to play Risk, and we used to play Axis and Allies, and we heard about diplomacy. We tried to play once, it didn't work out so well. Maybe we tried in other times as well, but I don't remember doing it. But fundamentally, like, if Trump is utilizing the levers of the state to get what he wants, utilizing bluffs, utilizing the threat of tariffs, right? He hasn't actually done anything yet. He doesn't have the power to do anything yet. Can't do anything. But he's utilized these things to create movement in other countries for him to get what he wants, right? But Canada, it seems, we're playing a different game. We're not looking at number one, is this a legitimate complaint? Number two, how could we correct this if it was a legitimate complaint? Number three, it would be very important for our economy to make sure this relationship stays, positive and flowing monetarily. And yes, we do get big subsidies from the United States, so maybe we'd want to keep those. So we might not want to piss them off. You know what I mean? And so to me, the strategy would be very different. Like, oh, yeah, great point, Mr. Trump. We're definitely going to fix that before you get in office. And we're going to do everything we can to signal that we're fixing that so these 25% tariffs never come into play. That would be my strategy. But that would probably be like a thinking person's strategy. But man, like when you're playing high stakes poker, sometimes you think you've got an ace in the hole. But in this situation, it doesn't seem to make sense to do what they're doing on the Canadian side. The American side makes perfect sense. Ryan is highlighting this. We have more people collecting taxes than we do within our army. Can you tell where our government's priorities are? So there is an army of 58,000 tax collectors, and our army only has 33,000 active personnel. Isn't that wild? That's pretty wild. Here's the committee exchanging this information.
How many full-time equivalents are there right now for the employee count of the CRA?
How many employees? About 58,000 in the agency, about 58,000.
Army of 58,000 tax collectors. The Canadian Army has only 33,899 full-time active personnel. Your army of tax collectors is enormous, Minister, and we are seeing an alarming trend of write-downs and thefts. How many full-time equivalents are there?
Right, an army, right, of tax collectors. That's the worst, right? That's absolutely terrible. Are they armed? Not yet, but in the United States they might be. True North is reporting former Alberta NDP Premier Rachel Notley ended her nearly years-long political career after announcing her official resignation as the MLA for Edmonton Strathcona. It has been years long. Nearly years long. I don't know what they mean there, but it is years long. No nearly needed. So Rachel Notley's out, or maybe she's pursuing the federal leadership of the NDP. Who knows? Are they going to get rid of Jagmeet Singh or no? Donald Trump is talking about getting rid of daylight savings time on Truth Social. He says Donald Trump says the Republican Party will use its best efforts to eliminate daylight savings time, which has a small but strong constituency, but shouldn't. Daylight savings time is inconvenient and very costly to our nation. Yep. There's a hidden cost to all of that, like the transition. It's unnecessary. Moving around, having time change and all the accidents and all the rest of the stuff that goes on with that, unnecessary completely. And people are sick of it. So I hope that Ontario and Quebec have passed laws saying if the United States moves on this, we'll move on it too. And so if they move, we do. And Saskatchewan's already done it. I don't know. Does Alberta have daylight savings time? I'm not aware. What about BC? Right? I don't know. And I don't know about Newfoundland. Would all of the provinces need to independently agree? I know Ontario has already agreed, and Saskatchewan's just never did it. So I don't know if it would need to work through all the provincial legislatures. But interesting. If it does, I'll let you know. Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to CanadaPoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for Shop and Donate and look for subscriptions, and you'll get immediate access to the full show. Love to see you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful